6:35, well, almost 6:36 in Trinidad and Tobago. So thank you so much for joining us right here on the Morning Brew. Let's get into it. We are going to open up a conversation on child labor in Trinidad and Tobago because tomorrow is World Child Labor Day, and we do have issues with incidences of child labor right here. So we might as well get informed so that we can report it when we see it happening. I'm being joined by Farouk Mohammed. He's a labor inspector too at the Ministry of Labor. Good morning, Mr. Mohammed.
Good morning, and good morning to your viewers.
So just so that we can start off with a definition, what is child labor?
So child labor is work that is morally, that is dangerous to children. Trinidad and Tobago has declared 16 years as the minimum age for employment. So therefore, anyone under the age of 16 engaged in labor would be considered child labor. It's work that is hazardous to their health, to their welfare, etc.
And I mean, how do we have a serious problem with child labor in Trinidad and Tobago? How big of a problem has it been?
Well, it's not as visible in Trinidad and Tobago as it may be in other parts of the world, for example, Latin America, Africa, etc. But again, it may be not underreported. It may be underreported. So it may exist, particularly in the informal sector, in rural areas, hidden from the eyes of government regulatory agencies. Persons may not be aware of what is and what is not child labor, and therefore not see it as an issue and report it. So hence the reason why we have this campaign to raise awareness. So we want to get to those children who are in child labor, and we want to ensure that they are removed from those situations, but not only removed, but also they are placed in support services and programs through the Children's Authority, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Social Development, to ensure that there is some sort of support for them as well as their families.
Mr. Mohammed, are you able to give us some examples of how we can spot child labor and know, okay, this is a problematic situation that I'm witnessing here?
Yeah, so child labor is basically when a child is taken out of school and put to work. So you look for signs like during school hours, they are not in school. Well, under the pandemic now, we have online classes. So if they are missing their online classes, that is a sign that these persons are in child labor. If they are exposed to the elements, for example, what we have noticed, and from the couple of reports that we have, children selling on the beach or selling produce in vegetable stalls on the highway, etc. So these are some of the signs we can look out. We suspect it mainly occurs in the agricultural sector, but one of the things we lack is reliable, up-to-date data on the child labor situation in Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay, I like that there are tips for teachers who, they deal with children every day. So if they notice some of their students are missing, they might have to inquire and ask a question as to the reasons for those children not being available. And yeah, I am someone who loves to go to the beach once they're opened and it's legal. And you do see children selling fruits all hours of the day. If I were to witness a possible violation, how do I report it? Should I report it, and how do I report it?
Sure. So you can report it to the Ministry of Labor, the Labor Inspectorate Unit, and we can be contacted at 299-0300, option 3. Or you can also report it to Childline. They have a 24-hour hotline. It's 131 or 800-4321. And they provide psychological counseling support to children as well as their families. You can also report it to the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, and they have a hotline. It's 996 or 800-2014. And also hazardous child labor, you can report it to the Occupational Safety and Health Agency at 623-6742. And also for child trafficking issues, you can contact the Counter Trafficking Unit at 800-4282.
Can we talk about child trafficking? How does that differ?
So we have the traditional forms of child labor, and then, as we spoke about earlier, and then we have what is called the worst forms of child labor. So these are the extreme cases like child trafficking, using children for drugs or illegal arms, etc., for hazardous work, where they are exposed to dangerous chemicals, the elements, dangerous machinery, etc. These are considered the worst forms. And the child trafficking is monitored by the counter-trafficking unit of the Ministry of National Security. Things like child prostitution are also considered child labor, and using children for arms and drugs are investigated by the Child Protection Unit of the Ministry of National Security. And when it involves hazardous work, the Occupational Safety and Health Agency gets involved. And I should mention that this applies to children under 18 years. Although they are allowed to work from 16 to 18, these worst forms of child labor actually apply to those under the age of 18 years.
And how high are the incidences of child trafficking? Because while child labor is also difficult to identify, child trafficking can be particularly difficult to identify because the nature of it is often illicit, illegal, so it's not in daylight. And has that been rising in Trinidad and Tobago?
From the data we have received from the counter-trafficking unit, there have been a few cases that are under investigation at present. The exact figure I am unable to say. The counter-trafficking unit can provide more details on that data, but we do work closely with them because some children may be trafficked for labor exploitation. The Labor Inspectorate Unit of the Ministry of Labor would assist the counter-trafficking unit in those investigations.
And you're right about going to the counter-trafficking unit, but are you able to give some guidelines on what are some of the red flags for, if we come up on something that might be an incident of child trafficking as opposed to child labor?
Yeah, so the signs you would look for is that they may not have access to their travel documents, for example, their passport. They may be afraid to speak to strangers, even with the language barrier. There may be physical signs of abuse, on them, physical abuse. So there are different things you can look, and if you see those signs, those indicators, you can report it to the counter-trafficking unit.
Now, while child labor is illegal in Trinidad and Tobago, so children under 16 is the legal age for employment, there are exceptions such as working outside of school hours in the family business, and stuff like that, and working on vacation. When does it become vacation work, and when does it become problematic? Because you can have, there's also, what is illegal is forcing them to combine school work and labor. So that seems to be a very tight line to balance between what is allowed under the law and what is not allowed.
Yes, you're right. Each case has to be looked at on its own merit. So you may have a child who works in the family business, but again, this should not be during school hours. It should not be for long hours. It should allow them enough time to play, to enjoy their childhood, to be able to do their homework, to interact and socialize with other children, etc. They can work during the vacation time again, but for very few hours. Again, it must not impact on their growth and development. Those are some of the areas that they can, which would not be considered a child labor. Also, there are certain apprenticeship programs, approved government apprenticeship programs, but they may be required to work as part of their training. Those would not be considered child labor for those under 16.
Mr. Mohammed, the ministry is launching its calendar events for commemorating the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. What are some of the stuff that you'll have planned?
Well, yeah, so this year actually it's a twofold commemoration. We have the International Year, which is being commemorated tomorrow, June the 12th, as well as the United Nations has declared 2021 the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor, because countries around the world have committed to the Sustainable Development Goal Target 8.7 to eliminate all forms of child labor by 2025. So we will be launching a week of activities. Actually, we started the launch of activities yesterday via social media, and our handle is at LabourGovTT. That's at LabourGovTT. We would have launched the event yesterday, and coming up tomorrow, we will have a World Day Against Child Labor address by the Honorable Minister of Labor, Mr. Stephen McClatchy. And also, we will be launching our child labor puppet show tomorrow via social media. On June the 14th, we have done a pledge video bringing together all, because it's a whole government approach to addressing child labor. We have set up a national steering committee for the prevention and elimination of child labor, and this committee brings together 14 government agencies, 2 NGOs, as well as academia to work towards child labor. So they have prepared a pledge video and their commitment to how they are going to deal with child labor, for the remainder of the year. So that video will be launched on June the 14th, as well as one of our committee members, Dr. Anand Rampasad, who is a lecturer at the University of the West Indies, would be doing a newspaper column on understanding the link between sports and child labor.
Can I just interrupt you a second? Because that's very interesting. What are some of the threats or dangers with sports and child labor? Because, I mean, especially in primary school, in secondary school, you encourage your children to go into sports, especially if they have, super abilities and might be scouted by the national team. What's the danger with sports and child labor?
Yeah, it's an area that not much discussion has been held around, but sometimes children are placed into sporting activities and it impacts negatively on their education. And this is a concern that we have, and we need to, to have that discussion to raise more awareness. So there must be some sort of control while we encourage, children to engage in sporting activities. It must not be at the expense of their education, and it must not move into the realm of child labor. So Dr. Rampasad would be speaking a little bit about that through his column on June the 14th. And we'll be closing off our week of activities on June the 17th with a virtual art showcase. And this is a campaign we would have done a couple of years ago where child labor is depicted through the eyes of children in the form of art. And we would be having a virtual showcase on June the 17th via social media. But in addition to those activities, we also have some more exciting activities coming up for 2021. We would be having a child labor video monologue competition. So we're looking forward to engaging children in this process to look at their creativity, etc. We will be having some training for child rights ambassadors through the Office of the Prime Minister, Gender and Child Affairs Division. We will be preparing a child labor e-activity pack, exciting games, puzzles, etc. for children. This would be launched on social media. And also we will be doing some private public sector collaborations later in the year.
If I'm a teacher or a social worker, especially one who deals with children, and I want to get involved in these activities and know more, where can I go to find information?
Yeah, they can go to the ministry's website. It's www.labor.gov.tt. They can get more information. They can contact the Labor Inspectorate unit. They can contact our communications unit. And we have actually reached out to the Student Support Services Division of the Ministry of Education, and we are engaging in them, through their online classes as well as through the work that they do in monitoring children who may be absent from school. We are working with them to ensure that, that if there are children in child labor, we want to ensure that they are removed from that labor environment and placed into some sort of support programs. Now, COVID-19 has kind of exacerbated the situation. Parents have lost their jobs, their businesses have been closed, and for good reasons, because to slow down the increase in the virus, the infection rate. And it has created hardships for some families, but and they may use their children as a survival mechanism to make ends meet. But we want to let them know that there are a number of programs through the Ministry of Social Development that they can access services, so they do not need to, to use their children for labor purposes. And there are welfare grants, there are psychosocial support services, and they can call the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services at 800-1673, or also Childline at 131.
Mr. Mohammed, thank you so much for joining us this morning, because this has been a very illuminating conversation. And I'm glad that the Ministry of Labor is also aware that the COVID-19 pandemic has complicated situations, the situation for our children and our adults, and they might find themselves kind of wanting to lean on the children in a way that they ought not to.
Yeah, so definitely we would want to ensure that when the pandemic, when disuse provides for school to reopen and children to physically re-enter schools, we want to ensure that those children are not left behind who may have missed classes, online classes. There's some sort of arrangement to ensure that they do not fall out of the system. So we are working closely with the Ministry of Education on this. Let me just say that children are one of our greatest assets, and as adults, we must ensure that they are given all the opportunities to reach their full potential as adults. So we are saying, say no to child labor, to spot it, report it, so we can stop it.
Thank you. Say no to child labor so that we can spot it and stop it. Thank you so much, Mr. Farouk Mohammed. Mr. Mohammed is a labor inspector too at the Ministry of Labor. You can go find out more about the Elimination of Child Labor Day at labor.gov.tt. They're also on social media at labor.gov.tt. Thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break and come back with more after this.
Thank you.